So here's the situation, and we've all been there. You bought yourself a whole bunch of converters for your new rack build because, well, we need converters these days. Got yourself a whole bunch of stickers along the way. And you reach a point in the build when you go, how on earth am I going to power all this? Especially when they give you all this. And quite frankly, it's just a real pain. Be gone, because I've got a better option. We are going to make our own power supply. So stick along for the ride, and I'm going to show you how I'm working on my next build. Now, before we start, just a quick disclaimer. I take no responsibility for any damage that may be caused to your equipment. What is being done here is a custom modification. So make sure that you do your own research to make sure that what you are getting works for your equipment and for your region. So now with that out of the way, let's get right into the build. So here's some of the tools that I'll be using to do this modification. So a bunch of clippers. These are always very useful. Get yourself a nice pair. They'll always come in handy. A cable stripper. This guy is super handy for taking the ends off there. A multimeter. We are working with voltage here, so we want to make sure that what we are doing is correct. So we want to make sure that we get the right voltage, and also one that has a continuity on it so that you can see if the power is going through where you need it to go, and also find out if it's going where you don't want it to go as well. So super important, this one. Now, what I will typically use is a bunch of really good double-sided tape. So this is a Gorilla brand. I'm going to leave links in the description for all the bits that I'm using here. But this is a clear plastic style double-sided tape. Now, I have used some foam style before, and it has absolute pain to take off if you want to take it off later. But you want to find your most durable, it's not coming off style double-sided tape, because we are going to be putting this onto a rack unit here. Now, the other thing, of course, is the power supply. Now, this power supply is one that I've picked for the build that I am doing, and it meets the spec of the build that I am doing as well. So I want to make this very clear that you really need to pick the power supply for what you need. Now, this works for me, but it may not work for you. You need to double check the voltage and the amperage. So what I did for my build is I went through and I did a calculation of all the max power requirements for all of these power supplies to make sure that the amount of amps and watts that I have coming out of this matches, actually, sorry, it doesn't match. It exceeds the number of amps that we need to power this system. So make sure you do your own research. So for example, I went into the Blackmagic website under support, and I went down to look at the power consumption for each of these. Put them in a spreadsheet and figure out your total of how much you need to actually power your devices. Now, a quick rule of thumb, while say you need 100 watts to power your system, don't get yourself a 100 watt power supply. Give yourself some room. I like to have at least 50% on top, just so that I know that if there's a power surge, especially on boot up, that I'm not going to short out the power supply in doing so. So really important, make sure you get the power supply that is right for you. So I like to use the Meanwell power supplies. No real reason, but they are pretty robust. They're quite affordable as well and readily available. I just bought this from our local electronics store. And so this one is a 5 volts and 18 amp power supply. So all of these guys all run on 5 volts. So this is a super handy thing, because these only run on 5 volts and like 1.6 watts or something, or 2 watts maybe. So there's a very little amount of power that's needed, but this will do more than what I need to do. This is also going to power some extra bits like Raspberry Pis and some other 5 volt things in my system. But yeah, pick the right one for your build. Now there's a few ways that you can go about combining the power cables, and I'm going to show you how I've done that. But here is one of the things that I've found recently, which actually has come in really handy. So this is normally designed to sit on a DIN rail, but all this is basically a whole bunch of ports ready so that you can plug one power source in, and all of these are all lined up, and they all have continuity with each other. So all of these are active together. So if you put power into here, they will come out of all these ports. So this just gives me plenty of ports so that I can distribute it amongst the equipment that I have in the rack. Now, most importantly, make sure you label your stuff. So I'll put 5 volts here, because I'm going to have a 12 volt rail in my system as well. So you don't want to go around and get the wrong power, because obviously you're going to blow something up at some point. So label your stuff and check all your stuff. Can't stress enough. Check your voltage, check your amperage. Make sure that you're getting exactly what you need. So this is one option. Here is another option, which is some Weira power adapters as well. So these, basically you put the wire in and then you can lock it in. So super handy there. So that is a couple of options. The other option is, of course, you can solder some wires together. But these are the bits that I'm using and they come in real handy. All right, so all those wall warts you just threw out the door, well, you might want to grab them back now because those do have some handy cables which we might want to use. Now, obviously, you can go buy custom cables ready to cut yourself or just with the ends that you need. But what I'm going to show you is what I will typically do for the adapters I'm using, because realistically, I'm not going to ever use these adapters again because I'm making some custom so that I don't need to use this again. Now, the first thing I want to do when I'm ever doing a new cable build is to test the cable to know exactly what polarity we are getting from the connectors. So to know what the cables inside is actually going to, which end of the connector. So the way we'll do that, so here is a 12 volt power supply with a normal DC end. So I'm just going to cut off the end here and go through and strip back this wire. And this is where our multimeter is going to come in handy. So I'm going to strip that back and going to expose the two wires. Now this one is a little bit annoying because it's not two cores of cable. It's an outer shield and an inner core as well. But it's still definitely usable and something that I can show how to use. So I'm going to grab the multimeter here and I'm going to put it into continuity mode. So on this one here, it's a little kind of speaker Wi-Fi style button. And then I'm going to also go through and adjust it so that I can see the same label on the top here. Again, your multimeter may vary, but this is literally a $30 one that I picked up today to show off in this video. So first thing we want to do, we want to make sure that we are getting a beep so that when they're touching, they are actually coming through as a beep. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick one of the ends. So I'm going to pick the middle and see. So I'm getting a beep there, but I'm not getting a beep here. So that means that the center one is actually the inner white core on this cable. And to double check, the outside's there and not on the inside. So we know that the center of this one is the inner core and the outer is the outer shield. Now, we want to make sure that whatever device we are using, we check to know what polarity our device is. So typically, the middle will be positive and the outer will be negative, but not every device will do that. So always double check. Make sure that you know exactly what's going on. Now, for today's build, we're going to be doing USB-C. Now, this is actually a lot more difficult to test because, well, the pins in here are very, very small, and trying to find out which pins are the same, which one is which, is a bit more difficult as well. But I have used these power supplies before, and I have checked them with other devices to know that the cable actually has some different markings on it. So you can see this bottom one has some white dots on it and the top one has all the writing. The back is all blank, but the top one, so the bottom one is actually the positive. So typically there's something with a white stripe on it will be the positive and the top one is a negative. So I know that for this specific power adapter and this specific cable, but again, please check before you do this yourself. So all of these power adapters now, I'm going to go through and cut them off from the wall warts, because these guys, dead to me. So I gave myself plenty of cable. I mean, I'm only going to need about a foot or so of this, but give yourself plenty to work with originally because you're going to cut this down to size for your build. All right, so I've got a bunch of cables here. So this is what we're going to use to power our system. Now, here is a top level overview of what we're trying to achieve here. We have ourselves our power supply. Now we're just using a single power supply. We can use a redundant, but for this build, I'm only just going to use a single power supply for this one. And we have our output terminals on the top here. So we want to double check for your specific power supply. I've got live neutral ground here for the AC coming in, and we have the voltage going out for DC. So this is where we're going to output our DC connection to our adapters. So from here, we are going to then connect from here to our bridge. This is going to make it easy for us to send out the voltage to our things. And then the cables are going to go from the bridge to each of our adapters. All right, so before we started filming, I went through and laid out my adapters on my rack shelf for the specific rack that I'm building. Now, obviously yours is going to vary depending on the equipment you got, the needs that you have. But this is a very typical situation. I got 5 SDI to HDMIs and 4 HDMI to SDI, 3Gs here for this build. I've also labeled exactly where they're going so that when I'm going through and patching things in, I know where that's happening. But that's down the track. Right now, I'm focusing on getting the power done. So normally I would actually do this inside the rack itself so that I can cable manage things down and know exactly where it's going. But I've already measured where this happens. So in the rack, this is going to be sitting above a bigger shelf, which will be holding this. Now, so basically, if I put this here, I know that this is actually the same distance that everything's going to happen on the rack when I'm actually finished it. So actually it's about that far away. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go through and plug in the power supplies, the power cables that I need, and I'm going to start cable managing them so that they can come out into one nice little line and give myself a bit of a service loop as well. Because we don't want to have things super tight straight away, because otherwise we're not going to get things in and out. But this is this is a permanent solution. This is not something that's going to be changed at all, ever really, until down the track and when I want to rebuild and do a new rack. But I'm going to go through and get myself these cables undone and ready to extend and line up to our power supply. All right, so there we have it. So I've gone through and I've connected all of these cables together. Now, it's only because I know that these are all the same voltages that I've actually gone through and done this all in one go. Typically, if I'm doing multiple things, multiple voltages, I'll actually go through and do one at a time to make sure I'm doing this to the right place. But I know these are all 5 volts. I know these are all within spec. And those are all going to the same place. So make sure that you're doing what you need first. Now, I almost forgot the most important bit of this entire build, or any build really, is some cable ties. Now I know there's people out there who think they need to use the Velcro strips, but look, I like using cable ties. I buy them by the thousands because yes, they're just really convenient. So my preference is cable ties. I know the comments are going to be blowing up going, where's your Velcros? I like my cable ties. Just don't judge me. All right, so key part here, cable management. Now, I know there's people out there who would just go run cables everywhere, but I like to have my cables all meticulously neat and tidy. So I'm going to go through one by one, and I'm going to put these into the power adapter here. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 things here, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines along here. Totally wasn't a fluke, that one. So we are going to go through and figure out a line for how this is actually going to roll out. So what I'm planning on doing here is kind of setting up a line so all the cables go down one direction. Then I can cable tie them all in nicely together, roughly like that. But I want to put them in line so that I know that this one is lined up with this end hole, so that if I need to go down the road and figure out why one of them is not being powered, I can then go through and figure out where it is here, double check the connections here, and if one of these have died for whatever reason, I'll know exactly what is going on. So I'm going to go through and run this down here. So I'm going to run to this hole so I can cable manage down at that point. Give myself a little bit of tail, and then that's going to be my measurement there for the first one. So you want to give yourself a little bit of room there, because we are going to have to split these across and then put them into the holes in there. So was it cut twice, measure once or something? No, measure twice, cut once. Yeah, give yourself plenty of measurement. Always make sure you're doing the right thing, because obviously once you've cut this, it is a pain to extend this later on. So I'm going to go through, have a look at that. I'm happy with that. And I'm going to make a cut and get rid of this excess cable. and throw that in the pile of wall warts, which we never want to see again, although I'm going to have to clean that later on, which is a little bit fun. So the cable stripper here, I'm going to go through and strip back these ends. Now that's about the right size for the adapters that I have here. I'm going to strip this back and I'm going to twist these ends so that I can go nicely into the adapter here. Now, we have to be super important to check this every single time. So this one is my positive and I'm going to put that into the red one. So I purchased the red and the black one so that I knew that red is positive, black is negative. If you haven't got different color ones, label them. Make sure you get the right ones and always double check. And I'm going to triple check, especially while I'm filming, because I don't want to blow any of these up. Like they're not crazy expensive, but they're also not cheap. So I'm going to go through, and with these ones, it's basically a case of you push them into the hole and then you push these buttons so that you can release the locking mechanism and then drop it in. This actually is handy for our multimeter. So I can push that in, and give ourselves a little pull test. I'm going to do the same thing for the negative. Push in the little red dot, and I'm going to drop that into the hole and a quick pull test. Now, before I finish this, I'm going to double check, did I get the polarity right? And yes, I do have the white ones on the red cable. So that is 1 of 9 done. I'll go through another one and then I'm just gonna, with the power of editing, go through and show you what it looks like when we're finished. So now I'm going for the second one. I'm going to line these up and start my cable management along here as well. So I want to make sure this looks nice, because it's, you know, it's not something that everyone will see, but you'll know that deep down inside your rack, you got some nice cable management going on, and you'll sleep better at night, trust me. So I'm going to go through and measure this. I've gone through and measured that. I'm going to cut off the ends into the pile. I'm going to strip back the cable. I'll show you. Yep, so we'll strip back the cable on the top camera. Pull the bits apart. It's a great time when you don't have nails to get this happening. Spin the bits together and check your polarity. Make sure you are going in the right direction. And now I'm going to put this into the positive. Quick pull test. Put this into the negative. And quick pull test as well. So now we have 2 of our 9 in there and nicely cable managed. So I'll come back in a few minutes and we will show you the finished product. And here we go for the last one. So that is all connected. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to check to make sure that the polarity is right. It is not worth blowing up your equipment just because you couldn't bother checking. So I'm going to go through all of them, make sure that I've got the positive in the right end. And of course, while I'm here as well, I'm going to double check to make sure everything is in all the way. So one of these I've noticed is sticking out a little bit, so I'm going to push that back in again and make sure that is all good. Double check on my negatives and now go through and do a little bit of cable management. Now it's also good practice to try and find if you're doing a rack like this, trying to find a hole so that you can actually tie off your cables to a hole. Because right now, these are all being supported by the connector. And if someone was to yank on the cable for whatever reason, we don't want to go through and break these connectors, because these are going to be very hard to repair, if at all. So I'm just going to find this little hole on the end and I'm going to tighten this back to give me a bit of strain relief on these connectors. A few more cable ties to go through to the ends and to put everything together. And now for some editing magic. And bam, there we have it. All of our power supplies have now been put into one nice little tidy adapter. So I think you can see that this is already a little bit of an improvement from what we had before. It's all in one space. Everything's all nice and cable managed. We can get access to all the HDMI ports that we need or whatever adapters that we're using. And it's all in one place. So I think this is a bit of a nicer system. So the next part now is to go through and actually power this rail. Now, I will send a link for this specific one, but again, make sure that you get the power supply for your system. This one works for me, might not work for you. So I don't want anyone commenting on things saying that they've got a bunch of magic smoke coming out of their equipment. So again, do your own research and make sure you get the right ones for you. So I'm going to get myself a thicker set of, I call it like speaker cable or DC cables. So since we've got, I mean, all of these are pulling very little amps. So I think total we're looking at about 20, 30 amps, or sorry, 20 or 30 watts of power here. But there are going to be more things plugged into this to start using up the rest of the wattage. So I'm going to get myself a thicker gauge cable to be able to actually power from here to the input of these guys. So I'm going to grab that cable now. All right, so I got myself some speaker cable, which is actually pretty good for this type of use case because it's thick cable, plenty of amps can go over it. So this is 14 AWG cable. Again, pick the for what your load is, but this will be more than enough for what we are trying to do. So I'm just going to cut myself off a little bit of length here. So I know on the bottom plate, this will be about what I would need for this. So I'm going to go cut this off and get that out of the way. And I'm going to now strip back this cable for use on our DC. So I'm going to give myself, I'll give myself a little bit more space there. We'll pull back the outer sheath. All right, so just got myself some red and black cable here. So I'm going to pull back the ends, ready to go into our ends here. Now, on this power supply, I've got the positive at the top there and negative at the bottom. So I'm going to go through and separate this out and spin the cable so that I can put this easily into the power supply. And I just realized I don't have a screwdriver, so I can't do this just yet. But I will do the other end first. So I'll go split the red off from the black, spin off these guys, and go through and put them into the big holes on these adapters here. So I'll push this in. Make sure that's really tight in, because obviously if we lose this one, we lose power to all of them. So we want to make sure that these are very well stuck in there. Okay, and there we go. So I've put that into here. Give yourself a good tug, make sure that's not coming out. And now I'm going to grab a screwdriver and plug this into the power supply itself. All right, so before we move on, I want to make sure that whatever you're working on right now, make sure that your power supply is not connected to mains. I can obviously see that it's not, there's nothing plugged into it. But if you are working on a already functioning system, make sure that your power supply is off so you don't have any chance of injuring yourself. So I'm going to go through now, checking that I've got this off, go through and loosen the terminals on my power supply here. Double check with the markings on top to make sure that I've got that in the right spot. And I'm now going to slide these in, making sure that there's no little strands of copper. So we want to go all the way through so that we don't see any copper, and we can tighten this off. Make sure it's nice and tight so it's not coming out. This is going to be in a row case, so this will be bounced around. And of course, give yourself a little pull test. So now, this is the DC side of this whole system is now done. So now we have to hook this up to AC. I'm from Australia, so we're using 240 volts. Obviously, make sure that your power supply is supported for your region. These power supplies are 100 to 240 volt compatible, so I've got no problem there. So for that, I am going to cut up an IEC cable. So I'm just going to chop this in half. This is only just for demo at the moment. But I am going to get this out of the way. Again, we are now starting to deal with live AC. This stuff will kill you. So please make sure that if you are uncomfortable doing this, do not move forward from here. Get yourself an electrician or something to do so if you're not comfortable with this part. So I'm going to strip back these wires. Again, this is only just for this power supply. Some power supplies may have an IEC input or already have a cable on it. But because this is bare bones, I'm going to go through this. And obviously making sure that this is not plugged in. Stripping back this cable, and now I have 3 exposed wires here. Now, for your region, make sure that you get your color codes correct with your power supply. So here in Australia, we have brown for live, blue for neutral, and green and yellow for earth. But again, make sure that you check with your cable and your region that you have got this correct. So I'm going to go through and expose these ends. I'm going to go onto our power supply and loosen these ports so that I can get this all powered. So live for me is brown, neutral is blue, should be the middle, and ground's on the right there. So I'll line these up and get these plugged in to the power supply here. So now I'll go through and tighten these back up again. Okay, so there we go. We have now wired up this power supply and we have got an AC connection going in through an AC to DC power supply to our DC connection. Now, before we plug this in, check everything. Check absolutely everything. Because if I made a mistake, I could very easily go through and blow up a few $1,000s worth of equipment right now. So, first thing I'm gonna do, check my cable. From the wall all the way out to your destination. Happy with the cable, I'm happy with the color code of this cable. I've got live in brown, neutral in blue, and ground in green. I'm going to check my voltages. So I'm going to check my 240 is accessible here, and this is a 5 volt and 18 amp power supply. Double check that. I'm now going through and checking to make sure everything is in the right thing and coming all the way through. I'm going to bring out my multimeter again. And I'm going to check to make sure that we haven't got nothing is bleeding in terms of we haven't got the positive and the negative coming together. So I'm going to put my positive in there, make sure that I've got positive on these outputs, so I'm getting a beep there. Now we want to make sure that we're not getting a beep on our negative. And we're not, so I've got positive there, but not negative. And we'll check the negative. We've got negative coming through, and we've got our positive not coming through there at all. So that is good. We have checked to make sure that there is no contamination between the two. So now we can now power this up and see if we get white lights on all of these adapters. All right, so one last thing I'm going to do on this power supply, especially because we have exposed terminals here, is go through and tape up the terminals so that no one can actually go through and electrocute themselves. So I'm going to put some red tape on here. It's a bit of a warning. Do not go through. Of course, I haven't plugged this in yet. So we want to make sure that these terminals are covered. So there we have it. We have our custom power supply ready to go, all nice and neatly cable managed. Absolutely beautiful. Now, Ryan, I hear you say, this is all too scary for me. I want this, but I don't want to be able to do it myself. So get in contact with us. We would actually really love to help you out with your next project. So here at Tiny Giants AV, we do this every day. This is for our kit, but we do builds for clients all the time. So go to our website, tgav.au, and we would love to get in contact with you and find out how we can assist you. So thanks for watching. We had a lot of fun making this. This is a build which is going to be part of another bigger build that we're working on. We've decommissioned our live stream studio in a box. You can check out that video up here. But that is now empty. That's now gone. There is no more to be seen. We've got a Constellation 4ME HD coming, which is going to be super exciting. And this will be part of it. So stay tuned for that. We will be giving you updates along the way. Thank you so much for watching. And please hit that like button if you like this. And please consider subscribing if you want to see more of it. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.